My mother abused me throughout my childhood, ruining my chances at college. I got my revenge by ruining her life growing up. My mom Linda wasn't nurturing. I'm not here to throw a pity party. I'm here to share my side. It all started way back. From the moment I can remember, Linda had a short fuse. I was always walking on eggshells, trying not to set her off. No matter how quiet or good I tried to be, it was like she had a sixth sense for finding something to get mad about. She'd yell for hours over the smallest things, like if I forgot to put a dish away or if I left a light on. Let me tell you, her screaming wasn't your ordinary. She would shout at me, making me feel like I was 2 inches tall. Then she started hitting me. I don't want to go into details about that, but it was as bad as you're probably guessing. To cope with all that, I started pulling these revenge stunts. They were petty, but they gave me a sense of winning something back. One time, I even peed in her iced tea. I know it sounds gross, but when you're a kid with no control over anything, you find weird ways to push back. I also did this thing where I'd rub her forks and spoons between my butt cheeks before setting the table. It was childish and it was totally satisfying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Remember, this was a kid's version of fighting back against a pretty crappy situation. As I got older, the situation didn't get any better. In fact, it got worse. By the time I hit middle school, I was resentful of her and everything at home. The air in our house was thick with tension. Just sitting in the living room felt like sitting in a minefield, waiting for the next explosion. She kicked me out, too, and told me to find somewhere else to live. Can you imagine telling a 13-year-old that? The first few times, I just wandered around the neighborhood until she cooled off. But one day, she was so fed up, she sent me away to another country for a whole year and tried to hold on to my passport so I couldn't come back. That year abroad was crazy. I was staying with relatives who barely knew me in a place where I didn't speak the language. It felt like I'd been dropped on another planet. But it was still better than at least at home. There was no screaming or hitting. I was confused and lonely, but it was better than being abroad. Getting back to the US was a whole adventure on its own. My mom didn't want me back, but my stepdad, Jack, wasn't about to let her send me away for good. He's always been more of a dad than my real dad ever was. So he pulled some strings and got in touch with the embassy to help me get back home. I made it back right in time for senior year, but I didn't have any credits from the year before. My school was like, who are you even? I had to work hard to catch up, staying late, coming in early, and even then, I only managed to get enough credits for a GED instead of a diploma. It was frustrating watching my friends gear up for prom and graduation while I was determined to make something of myself, and I did. I made one good friend, Mark. He was one of those guys everyone likes. He had his own troubles, but he always had a smile and a joke ready. We'd hang out after school, mostly at his place because mine was a no-go zone. His family was cool and treated me like I was one of their own. It was weird but nice to see what a normal family looked like despite everything. Linda she always said I'd amount to nothing, just like my dad, who I never really knew. But something about the way she said it made me want to prove her wrong. I started applying to colleges, thinking that if I could get a degree, I could get out for good. Linda laughed when I told her I was applying to colleges. She said I was dreaming if I thought I could make it. But when I actually got accepted into a 2-year program with a chance to transfer to a university later, she changed her tune. She suddenly changed her tune, making promises about how I could stay as long as I was in school. I believed her, which was a mistake. That was the setup. I know it's a lot, but that's where my story starts. It gets even crazier. Senior year was supposed to be the big finale of high school. Prom, graduation, those sweet moments of triumph. Well, for me, it was more about survival, rivals, and finding any scrap. I usually could have, but I had to scramble back from a year abroad. My stepdad Jack was the MVP of this story. I landed smack in the middle of what should have been my victory lap at high school. Instead, it felt more like starting over. I was the kid who disappeared for a year and then popped back up with a weird accent and clothes that didn't fit the local trends. On my first day back, I was already an outsider. I had to prove myself. I wasn't just going to waltz back in after a year, especially when my mom was known as the local nut job. So I was catching up academically because I was way behind. Teachers were giving me the side eye, wondering if I was going to stick around or if I'd vanish again. I started staying after school, hitting the books hard. It was either that or go home to Linda's latest screaming saga. I found religion in the religion of studying about a month in. I got this idea in my head that I could join the soccer team. It'd be a good way to meet people, blow off steam, and maybe even add something fancy to my college apps. Coach gave me a shot. He probably felt sorry for me, but I wasn't great. Still, running around the field felt like freedom. Plus, it kept me out of the house even longer, which was the real win. Linda was on her usual terror streak, finding new and creative ways to make my life hell. If it wasn't the yelling, it was the guilt trips or the cold shoulders. But this time around, I had soccer practice to drown it out. As soon as I hit the field, her voice couldn't reach me. Things took a nosedive halfway through the semester. Linda decided to throw one of her infamous fits right in the middle of a big term project. I was working on papers and my laptop nearly got smashed. Typical Linda chaos. This time I snapped. I told her she couldn't keep doing this. She kicked me out again, but this time it felt final. I grabbed my stuff and went to Mark's place. His parents were cool about it. They didn't ask too many questions. Mark just clapped me on the shoulder and made up the couch. That couch became my new base camp. School was my only escape. I was pulling decent grades. Teachers started noticing me, giving me nods and small smiles like they were silently rooting for me. I was proud of myself. I wasn't just the freak show Linda had always said I was. Then there was this one teacher, Mr. Thompson. He was like something out of a movie. He wore a tweed jacket and glasses, and he always had a book in his hand. He taught English and he got me hooked on classic novels. He said I had a knack for writing, and it blew my mind. Nobody had ever told me I was good at anything. Mr. Thompson gave me extra books to read outside of class. We'd chat about them after school or sometimes during lunch. He treated me like an adult, like my thoughts mattered. He even suggested I could be a writer one day. That idea stuck with me. I didn't go to prom. I didn't want to go. It was too much of a reminder of everything I wasn't a part of. But graduation was a different story. I was going to walk that stage, get my diploma, and prove Linda wrong. Graduation day was sunny, like the universe was giving me a break. I stood there in my gown, looking around at all the faces, hugging, and taking pictures. I felt a bit like an outsider, but then Mark's family pulled me into a photo. One of us, his mom, joked, "Squeeze me tight," as she walked across the stage, shaking the principal's hand and grabbing the diploma. I got that diploma, and it felt surreal. Despite everything, I had actually managed to pull something off. Mr. Thompson gave me a nod from the sidelines, and I swear that meant more to me than any family cheer could have. Summer rolled around, and I had to figure out what was next. College was looming, but so was the reality of living on my own. I wasn't going back to Linda's. I picked up a couple of jobs, landscaping by day and washing dishes by night, and I saved every penny I made. One night, I was lying on Mark's couch, staring at the ceiling. I thought about what Mr. Thompson said about writing. Maybe that was my way out, not just out of Linda's shadow but out of this whole mess. I could write my way into a new life. So I started writing. I wrote my thoughts, my stories, and filled notebooks with words. Most of it probably garbage, but it felt like I was building something. That summer, I learned a lot about myself. I learned that I could survive. I learned that I could make plans. And I learned that I could write a future where I was in charge. No Linda, no chaos. Just me and the words. As fall edged closer with the start of college on the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. After everything, I still found a spot for hope. And that's how it went. I was just a guy, a bunch of books, and determined to prove that I could be more than what Linda said I'd be. College was like stepping onto another planet. Not just because I was finally out of Linda's grip, but because everything was so different. I was a guy who barely managed to scrape through high school with a GED, but I walked into this big campus like I actually belonged there. The first few weeks were a blur of trying to find my classes, figuring out where the cheapest coffee was, and just trying to blend in with a bunch of kids who seemed like they had it all figured out. Spoiler alert, they didn't, but it sure felt like it at the time. I'd landed a spot in a community college about 2 hours away from my hometown, far enough to feel like a fresh start, close enough that I could still crash on Mark's couch if things I went south with the intention of acing the first 2 semesters and then transferring to a university. It was ambitious, given my track record, but I was fully committed. Classes were a whole new ball game. I'd picked a mix of general education courses and potential majors, but the real game changer was this intro to psychology class. The professor was an enthusiastic guy who could make even the driest topic seem like a mystery unraveling right before your eyes. I got hooked fast. It was like he was explaining all the crazy I'd lived through, but with fancy terms and theories. Then there was Sarah. I met her in that psych class. She was this quiet girl, always scribbling notes like she was going to be quizzed on life itself. We got partnered up for a project and we clicked. She had this way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. We started hanging out after class, sometimes grabbing that cheap coffee or hitting the library together. I was working 2 jobs, the campus bookstore during the day and a local diner at night. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, but I was managing. The hustle was real, but so was the motivation. I was determined not to screw this up. Not just for me but for Mr. Thompson, for Mark, and maybe even for Sarah, who saw something in me. My grades were holding up better than I'd expected. Turned out, college was about showing up and doing the work. I stayed out of drama. It was a simple formula, and it worked. Halfway through the semester, I had a solid B average. I could do this, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Money was tight. There were nights I'd find myself counting out change just to make sure I could eat the next day. I remember one night right before midterms, I had exactly $4 to my name. I bought a cup of noodles and a used textbook dinner. She made sure I had all the resources I needed to succeed, including a textbook, a study guide, and, of course, food. She made sure I was aware of all the campus events with free food and encouraged me to attend. She also made sure I was engaged in the academic community by accompanying me to lectures and other events. I appreciated her support and was happy to participate in these activities. With finals looming and my funding running out, I picked up extra shifts at the diner, studied between orders, and lived off coffee and adrenaline. It was exhausting, but quitting wasn't an option. Then, on a rainy night, everything nearly fell apart. I was biking back from the diner, dead tired, when a car came out of nowhere, swerved to miss it, and ended up eating pavement. I broke my wrist, trashed my bike, and there I was, lying in the rain, wondering. I had to go back to my mom's house because I couldn't finish the semester with a cast up to my elbow. She told me I would always have a place to live until I finished college. My first 2 semesters at a 2-year college, I maintained a 3.7 GPA. My teachers loved me. It was my escape. At the end of my 2nd semester, during finals, I came home late one night around 1 at 10 p.m. My mother barged into my room, screaming at me to leave. I was slightly drunk, but I ignored her and walked to my room. If I opened my mouth, that day would be the day I blew up and cast her out. I've rarely ever raised my voice at her because it never ended well. I'm 19 now, and I've been doing school full-time with no savings. To my room. She rips my door open and starts yelling. I stare at her, unflinching. She walked away and called the police on me, claiming I'd murder her and my younger siblings. I don't know where she got that idea from. She's the one who's nearly killed me many times. I packed everything into a duffel bag and left 5 minutes later. I failed all of my finals because I couldn't make it to my school. I was homeless for the next 2 to 3 years. I survived in a big city with no college degree by making the best of it. I made a lot of bad choices due to my bad habits. Eventually, I found a profitable hobby that gave me meaning. Through that, I started to work my way up. I got my own apartment, had a full-time job, and did my hobby on the side. I hadn't kept up contact with my mother at all, but my younger sister I was old enough to have a phone, so I found her on social media. I saw photos and such. She didn't have it anywhere near as bad as me, but she did get beaten on occasion. My mother reached out via email. She was all smiles, asking how I've been. I've always been envious of most people's relationship with their moms, so I gave her a chance and called her. We talked for a few minutes. Everything was civil and it seemed like things would go okay. Then she asked me what I told her I'd been homeless for a while and struggled after what she did to me, but I worked my way out of it. She laughed in a condescending way and said I never did a thing to her, so I don't know what abuse is. It's your own fault you were homeless, so how about you? I hung up by then. I was speechless and fuming. I don't know what abuse is, all right? I spent too damn long letting you destroy my sanity. Now is the time. There were a few things my mother didn't know. 1. I knew for a fact that the current well-paying job she had was gone on lies. She never got her college degree and lied about it on her resume. 2. I had access to all of her email accounts and cloud storage account. I set them up. I set them up when I was younger, and she never changes her passwords. She definitely wasn't aware that from the age of 13. I took photos of all my bruises, marks, wounds, and bloody noses, saving them to my computer and then Google Drive. My little sister had also been sending me photos via social media of the bruises she got from my mom. I immediately compiled all of those photos and videos into one folder. I then reached out to CPS in my city and explained that my siblings were being abused. I also told them about my own abuse and how I had mountains of proof. I had called the cops on my mother before, and when my older sister was abused, the police came almost immediately. They arrived almost a day later with my mother in handcuffs. My younger sister was being beaten at the time. The police removed all my siblings from the house. My mother was arrested, but she was released hours later. I was given a detailed account of the events because my mother's best friend is a gossip. My mother told her son everything, and he told me without either of their knowledge. I sent CPS all the evidence, and there's a legitimate case against my mother now. The next day, I emailed and called her job to inform them that she lied about having a college degree. I informed them of the current events in her life, which sparked a background check. She was fired days later by B to a $75,000 salary and a blacklist. I then deleted every cloud account and email address I ever made for her, which was all of them. This will make it nearly impossible for her to keep up with a lot of bills. I then anonymously reported her to the IRS because of the tax fraud she committed for years. She claimed people's children that weren't hers with a lot of detailed information. I lived with her while she did it, so now my mother lost all her kids and her job. I'm meeting with a caseworker from CPS next week to talk more about what happens moving forward. I know they're not going back. She'll have to figure out how to pay her mortgage now and survive. She'll get a call from the IRS. The IRS is going to come after her for a few thousand she owes them. She also has to go back to court in a few months. I don't know what she was charged with, but in the meantime, I've swallowed my pride and moved into a homeless shelter in my city specifically for people with jobs and savings. I'll be able to continue saving while I work on bettering myself as a person. I created an action plan and mapped out all my goals and how I want to achieve them up until recently. I wasn't even planning on being alive. I'm sorry if that's too dark. I always had these thoughts, wishing my mother would have finished the job with me and made life easier. But as of late, I'm becoming more and more curious about what I'm capable of. If I give myself the chance, I know I can do it. I've been able to visit my younger siblings, and I've gotten to know my little sister a bit better because of the experience. I've also only drunk 3 times. In the last 4 months, I've only had to deal with this a few times, which isn't ideal, but it's a change. My younger siblings are still with CPS, but I can't go into detail. My mother was supposed to go to a hearing to get them back, but things got complicated. My mother's best friend's son, whom I've known for 8 years, does his best to relay all the crap my mother tells her while they talk on the phone all day. Things have taken a turn for the worse. My mother has fallen behind on her mortgage payments. My youngest sibling's father, who is also my fiancé, has ended their engagement and is attempting to gain custody of our child. I heard that my mother was devastated and then disappeared, but that didn't make me feel any better. I wasn't looking for a winner. I just wanted to tell someone what was going on. But then something changed my mind. It was something I wasn't expecting. It happened months after I set this all in motion. I got a phone call. My mother used to call me all the time, even after I moved out. It used to bother me, but it doesn't anymore. It was just another thing that happened. She always had my number, but she never reached out. Even when things first started going downhill, I doubt she even gave me a second thought. My mother is gone now. A few weeks after I set my plan into motion, the state I'm in brought felony charges against her. She left the country shortly after. She went to her home country in South America. I have no idea how she was even allowed to leave, but they didn't take her passport. She avoided specifics on that part. She mentioned staying with a family friend temporarily and tried to frame it as a short vacation. She didn't even say hello. She started the conversation by ordering me to go somewhere quiet before launching into a sob story about how things have been going for her. This is after months of no contact. She even laughed at me for being homeless and denying she ever abused me. She started off by denying she ever abused me, despite the fact I was homeless and she had lied to me for months. She just kept talking, as if it was nothing. It was surreal. I felt so cold just listening to her. It was like talking to a stranger. She lost out on so much money and doesn't know how it all happened. Finally, she brought up the topic of me and my siblings. She brought up my little sister in the night of the emergency removal. She started complaining about how she misses my little sister and brothers. She says that it's going to mess up tax season. Then she had the audacity to try to convince me to go talk to the caseworkers to back up her claim that she never abused them or me. She said that to me after everything, of all people, 9 minutes into the conversation. It was like nothing ever happened. But it wasn't anything new. Of course I cut her off. But at that point I had already made up my mind. I asked her if she remembered when I used to make her iced tea. She was taken aback but said yes. I paused for a few seconds before slowly telling her in detail about all the ways I sabotaged her iced tea. She tried to interrupt me once, but I didn't stop talking. I told her about how I'd always put too much sugar in it, and she never tasted it and kept drinking more, which is why I always insisted there was just silence on the phone. I know she was listening. I told her to wait until after dinner when I got home from school to shower so I could rubber spoons between my butt cheeks for maximum damage. I'd mix it into her food to mask it. At this point, I'm not even sure she's listening, but I'm still describing specific days I remember doing it. She knows I remember. She finally loudly interrupts me, screaming at me disgusting, evil things. She cursed me. She cursed me the way she used to back in the days when she was standing over me with an extension cord beating the skin off of me when I was younger. She's blaming me for ruining her life. She's blaming me for how she wishes she had a better child. She doesn't know that I directly caused the destruction of her current life. She's speaking about the past. I just let her waste her breath. Her breath. She couldn't touch me or my siblings. It only lasted a few seconds. Now I remember spending years daydreaming of all things I'd say to my mother if I had the chance. But I just bottled it up with all my other baggage and kept trying to exist. When she finally shut her mouth, I calmly told her, "Look, Mom, you don't know what abuse is, and it's your own damn fault. This is all happening to you, too. It's my bad for. I pissed in your iced tea." Then I hung up the phone and blocked her number. That was the last day I drank. I haven't talked to her since. I'm not sure she's aware, or maybe she is. It was a bad idea to leave the country with all this going down. Even if it was for a few weeks, it was still a bad idea. I'm done with her. I don't want an apology. I just want to move forward and be a better person. I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. I try my best to put as much positivity into the world and share it with the people around me as much as possible. But screw her. I don't know if she knows it was me, but I didn't tell her. I'm sure she can guess, though. If she really tried, that's my revenge. It's still actively screwing her life up, but I'm not taking any active part in it. I wish it weren't like this. I wish I had a real family that loved me and I knew how to love back the right way. I wish I had a real relationship with my mother. None of those things happened. I wish I could have turned out like one of the happy people in the world. But I can spend all day wishing, but none of it could change. So I have to accept what happened and go on with my life.